Good evening. My name is Brian Dorries. I'm the artistic director of Theater of War Productions, and we're a social impact company that uses theater as a tool to help communities address pressing public health and social issues. And we are thrilled that you could join us tonight for our presentation of the education of Corporal John Musgrave in partnership with DAV, Disabled American Veterans. Before getting started, I just want to highlight that tonight's event will feature closed captioning in English. To access the live captions, please activate them now at the bottom of your screen, where you can also adjust the font size. Tonight's program will present live readings of The Education of Corporal John Musgrave, a searing new memoir about the Vietnam War and its aftermath, as a catalyst for powerful intergenerational discussion about the cost of war and the challenges of healing wounds, both visible and invisible. John Musgrave moved audiences in Ken Byrnes and Lynn Novick's PBS series, The Vietnam War, in which he shared the harrowing and humanizing story of his military service and return to civilian life following a fateful tour as an infantry Marine in Vietnam. Now, in his incredibly powerful new memoir, The Education of Corporal John Musgrave, recently published by Alfred A. Knopf, John has shared the full story of his coming of age during the Vietnam War and the lasting impact it had on his life. John's account brims with insights forged in combat, recovering from major injuries after the war, and during his long journey of healing as a poet, a protester, and a spokesperson for Vietnam veterans against the war. Of his memoir, Kirkus states in a starred review, "There is not a false note in this book, full of pride and sorrow. It's just the retort to those who wonder why Vietnam vets can't just forget about the past and move on." Smart and self-aware, Musgrave delivers one of the best recent books on America's experience in Vietnam. Here's John's official bio. John Musgrave was born in 1948 in Independence, Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City, graduating from Van Horn High School in 1966. After high school, he enlisted in the Marine Corps, ultimately becoming a member of the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines. John served in the Marine Corps, ultimately becoming a member, and then John served in Vietnam for 11 months before being permanently disabled by his 3rd wound at the Battle of Con Thien in November of 1967. He was medically retired as a corporal in 1969. After returning to the States, John studied at Baker University in Baldwin City, Kansas, where he struggled with PTSD and suicidal ideations. Eventually, John joined the Vietnam Veterans Against the War, participating in protests in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere around the country. After years of struggle, depression, and heart-searching, he learned to cope with his PTSD, though as with most veterans, that would remain a lifelong process. He has worked extensively with other veterans in suicide prevention programs, such as the National Veterans Wellness and Healing Center and the U.S. Army's worldwide stand down for suicide awareness. In recent years, John has become particularly focused on engaging and helping post 9/11 vets. John's book, The Education of Corporal John Musgrave, is available wherever books are sold, and we are now dropping a link into the chat in case you feel moved to order a copy for yourself, a friend, or someone you love at some point or by the end of tonight's event. Before getting started, I want to offer my sincere thanks to our partners at DAV, with special thanks to Rob Lewis, Todd Hunter, and Ashleigh Byrnes in the communications office, and to Andy Marshall, who currently serves as national commander of DAV. We're thrilled to be partnering with DAV tonight and to engage a large national and even international audience in crucial dialogue through John Musgrave's stirring and unforgettable story, and look forward to many more collaborations with DAV to come. I'd also like to thank Theater of War Productions company manager and producer Marjolaine Goldsmith, who brilliantly transitioned our work to Zoom in May of 2020, who will be conducting tonight's event behind the scenes. Finally, I'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for their support of Theater of War Productions' digital programming. Tonight's event will unfold in 3 parts. First, the actors will read selections of John Musgrave's memoir, The Education of Corporal John Musgrave, Vietnam and its Aftermath. We have an amazing group of actors to perform for you here tonight, including Oscar Isaac, David Strathairn, Colonel retired Gregory D. Gadson, Ashleigh Byrnes, and author John Musgrave, who will be performing for their homes all over the country. I should mention here that the material they're going to be performing is unsparing and depicts graphic violence and also has very strong language. I don't mean this as a warning. I really mean it as an acknowledgement of John Musgrave's telling the truth of his experience. But I want you to know it before you hear it, because it's important to know what you're getting into. When the actors are done about 45 minutes in, they're going to be followed by a group of community panelists who will respond in the moment to what they heard and saw in the performance that resonated with them in the reading tonight. Joining us on the panel will be Greg Gadson and Ashleigh Byrnes, who will also be reading, but also Andy Marshall, National Commander of DAV, Joshua Mance, author of The Beauty of a Darker Soul, Overcoming Trauma Through the Power of Human Connection, Michael Naranjo, a blind Native American sculptor and Vietnam veteran, and Naomi Mathis, a mother warrior and DAV benefits advocate, along with John Musgrave himself. Following the panelists' brief opening remarks, with the fleeting time that we'll probably have left after our focus on John's book tonight, we'll open up the floor to what we hope will be a lively, healing, constructive discussion with you, the audience. During the discussion, I'll ask questions about what you heard in John's book and how it resonates with you today. And if you'd like to respond to one of my questions, I ask you just use the raise your hand function on Zoom to indicate you have something to say. For each question, we'll call upon a number of people who raise their hands and promote them to the screen for the duration of their remarks. This is still new territory for us. 68 virtual performances in, a new way of performing, a new way of communicating. So we apologize in advance for the fact that we won't get to everyone who wants to talk tonight. And there could be glitches or technical issues, but that's fine with us, because making mistakes and overcoming them is at the center of our model. Our hope is that by making mistakes and adapting and moving on, we're modeling for you as an audience what we hope you'll do during a discussion. We hope you'll join us by taking the risk of making a mistake or not sounding brilliant or polished in order to be present in the moment with each other. Even at this point, 2 years into our experience of this pandemic, without judgment and with shared vulnerability. This is what makes us human, and it's the only way out of this mess. So now it gives me great pleasure to turn things over to our actors and their reading of selections from John Musgrave's memoir, The Education of Corporal John Musgrave.
Book 1, The Making of a Marine. I started haunting the Marine Corps recruiting station in Independence, Missouri when I was 13 years old. Over time, I came to know the recruiters pretty well. One of them, Gunnery Sergeant Matthews, who had served in World War II and Korea, looked like an English bulldog. I went down to the office for the first time in February of 8th grade when I was 4 feet, 11 inches tall, and offered up to the recruiters in my prepubescent voice, "I'm going to be a Marine." They weren't totally discouraging, but they did tell me to come back when I had grown a set of balls and put on a little more weight. In February of 1966, my senior year of high school, I returned to the recruiting station to pick up some Marine Corps magazines and posters for my room. By this time, I had grown a bit and my voice had finally dropped, but I still had a long way to go before I imagined I would be Marine material. When Gunny Matthews saw me, though, he immediately asked if I was 17 yet. When I told him I was, he fired back, "Well, then, are you going to join the Corps today?" Unable to form a sentence, I sputtered. All I had wanted to do my entire life was to be a Marine. Now, asking me if I wanted to join the Corps was like asking me if I wanted to play in the Beach Boys. When I finally regained my wits, I said something to the effect of, "Hell yeah," and plopped down in a chair right next to Gunny Matthews' desk. He pulled out this huge stack of forms and said, "Let's get her done." Given my age, we both knew that he would still have to come to my home and convince my parents to sign, but he wanted to get my commitment down in writing then and there so that all my parents would have to do was agree. Once we'd signed all those papers and they obtained my parents' permission, there would be no turning back. Gunny Matthews had a strategy and a plan, and he caught me flat-footed when I walked into his office that day. First, he told me, "We've got to decide your obligation," which meant how many years of service I'd be signing up for that day. Gunny Matthews laid out the options: reserves for 5.5 years, a 3-year program of active duty, a 4-year program, and even a 6-year obligation, of which 4 could be active and 2 could be inactive. Reserve, where you didn't have to go to do anything, but could be called up anytime. After hearing all the options, I said, "Hell, give me 20. I want to be a career Marine." He laughed. "Okay, I'll tell you what, why don't we just start out with 4? And I said, "Okay, that sounds like a good deal to me," but I was ready to sign the rest of my life away to the Marines. I was nervous sitting in front of that pile of paperwork. In fact, I was so shaken and excited that I managed to misspell my own name on the first 3 forms he gave me. The first time I thought, okay, that was weird, that won't happen again. But then I repeated the mistake 2 more times. When he pointed it out, I was embarrassed. Of course, it wasn't lost on me that I was in that very moment achieving a lifelong dream. I was also aware that there was a war going on and I could very well be signing my obituary. Though it was still early in the war, the impact of the conflict was already being felt in Independence, Missouri, as many young men from my school and community had enlisted, trained, and were fighting overseas. There had been close to 2,000 American casualties in Vietnam in 1965, including one of my classmates from Van Horn High School, Bill Peck, the tall kid with reddish blonde hair, whom I had known since 8th grade. Now, as sobering as that was, I was still thrilled about the prospect of going to war. It made enlisting a lot more intense, but it also ensured that I wouldn't end up sitting on my ass for 4 years at Camp Pendleton, running drills and training endlessly to go to war, but never getting to fight in one. I knew that if I really wanted to serve my country, I needed to be there when I was needed the most, which was then in the beginning of 1966, when Marines had been dying in Vietnam for over a year. I was determined to go there and prove myself worthy of being called a Marine. Gunny Matthews handed me my official Marine recruit ID card, which read, Private John D. Musgrave 2294574 has enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. He said, if you ever get stopped by the police or somebody asks you for identification, just show them this card and it may get you out of trouble. And it actually did save me from a traffic ticket once. I've been chasing a girl from church while riding my motorcycle.
At boot camp, the first thing they did after we arrived was shave our heads. If you had any moles, they told you to put your finger on them so they wouldn't cut them. Of course, as soon as a recruit put his finger on a mole, they would just bear down harder with the razor. When it was your turn, the barber would ask, and how would you like your haircut today? And some of these guys were so dumb they would actually say, I'd like a little bit on the top, which meant they would get fucking hammered. I'd had short haircuts most of my life because of my curly hair, but I'd never had it this short. It felt like they took off 2 or 3 layers of skin. Our heads shaved, we ran back outside at top speed with the drill instructors screaming at us, and as instructed, placed our feet on the painted yellow footprints on the pavement, a hallowed Marine Corps tradition that signaled the beginning of our transformation from civilians to Marines. My best friend Jay and I stood there shoulder to shoulder at the front. We looked up and could see our reflections in the windows in front of us, at which point we both started to giggle. And this was not the thing to do as freshly shaved recruits. It was an incredible moment of transition. We were recruits, scared out of our wits, but still civilian enough to acknowledge the absurdity of how we looked. We wouldn't laugh again for many weeks, not until the very end of boot camp, when we finally began to relax.
The next thing they did was run us into the receiving barracks, nicknamed the House of Horrors. As soon as we entered the building, they made us stand in front of these stalls in which they had placed cardboard boxes. Everything you were born with, everything you weren't born with, the drill instructor said, goes in the box. Beyond that, we were allowed to keep our wallets. That was it. We couldn't hold on to rings or watches or anything, which made a sure search, which they made sure of searching for contraband, ordering us to strip naked and place our shirts, shoes, socks, skivvies, and everything in our pockets in the boxes. Then they would go through individually and make sure we weren't trying to smuggle anything in. They found knives, cash, all kinds of stuff. All that money was, of course, donated to the Recruit Depot Fund, which probably meant it went directly in their pockets. When everything was in place, they gave us a sticker, which we filled out with our addresses before flattening them on boxes, ready to be mailed home. Then they ran us straight to the showers. You got 60 seconds, and we were all in there together at the same time. As it turned out, a number of the recruits, those who had gone to religious schools, had never been naked in the presence of other guys, and they stood out. They had these extra wide-eyed looks on their faces, expressing utter disbelief over what they had signed up for. When their showers were cut off, everything started to move at double time. They ordered us to run, not walk, to the supply floor where there's clothing and other hygiene products, part of what was called a bucket issue. We would be issued and the guys began slipping and tripping over each other. And when they collided and the bodies began piling up, it sounded like a herd of buffalo going over a cliff. The scene descended in chaos, flesh slamming against flesh. People screaming obscenities, things I'd never heard before, and the overwhelming cacophony of voices rose to become an unrelenting barrage of hatred and contempt. I got shoved forcefully into the wall, and then some guy fell on top of me. I was terrified. I wondered if I would emerge from the pile alive, but the voices of the drill instructors came raining down upon us, ordering us to get up and get into uniform.
We were issued one pair of trousers, one pair of skivvies, one pair of socks, one skivvy shirt, one utility jacket, and one yellow sweatshirt with a Marine Corps emblem, which thrilled the shit out of me. These days, you can go to a Walmart and buy a Marine Corps t-shirt, but in those days, it wasn't so easy. I'd been dreaming about becoming a Marine, and the only thing I owned that had an Eagle Globe and anchor on it was an old raggedy Marine utility jacket with none of its buttons that a girlfriend's father had given me. I was proud to own that jacket. Now I had my own sweatshirt and Marine utility covers, each featuring an Eagle Globe and anchor, the Marine Corps insignia. I was thrilled. Before handing us our uniforms, the drill instructors drove us up a flight of stairs where we were told to give them our trouser and head sizes. At the time, I had a 28-inch waist, but in the melee of all the guys screaming, I shouted out 36 inches. I had entered panic mode and had lost all capacity for rational thought. There were drill instructors everywhere screaming at us, shoving us, and threatening to kill us, and everything was run, 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 you're too slow. I have no doubt they knew from just looking at me, my waist size was not 36 inches, but straight away, they threw me a pair of utility trousers, size 36. I didn't realize what had happened until I put them on, but then all of a sudden I found myself drowning in these trousers. Now we had each been issued a belt that was 44 inches long, which we weren't allowed to trim. So there I was wearing utility trousers that I had to fold over in order to get them to stay on, and they were barely held together by a 44-inch belt, the end of which was flopping around like an elephant's dick. I looked so ridiculous that one of the drill instructors yanked my cover down over my ears and told me that I looked like 5 pounds of shit in a 3-pound bag. When they told us to hold up our hands and let them know if something didn't fit, I was mortified. But even more so when I actually raised my hand and found myself in a complete world of shit for being the stupidest motherfucker on earth. Was I the only child in my family to live? And were my parents cretins? They asked me. Now, I didn't know what a cretin was, but I knew it couldn't be a compliment. So I got all this extra abuse while they brought guys in from other parts of the receiving barracks to get a good look at this perfect example of what a maggot really is. They swore they were going to make a recruiting poster out of me. I was so fucking embarrassed.
Before anything else happened that night, we had to go for evening chow. They walked us outside, and because we weren't even official maggots yet, we weren't allowed to march. We were told to drag our feet and move to the nearest chow hall. Every Marine recruit in that chow hall, no matter if he'd been there a day or 6 weeks, stood ahead of us and was whispering insults at us, telling the instructors to make sure we only got about 2 bites of food. At one point, a drill instructor jumped up on the table and ran down, kicking our trays to the floor, screaming at us. The other recruits were terrorizing us too, trying to humiliate us before we were taken back to the receiving barracks. And from that point on, the abuse just kept coming and it never let up. After being run around the House of Horrors for hours, screamed at from all sides and put through the paces, at one point, we were made to stand in front of some stalls, and the drill instructors left us there and were gone for a couple hours, during which time we were convinced, absolutely sure, that they were waiting outside the door, listening, waiting for us to make a sound. We were all so scared that no one said anything. We just stood there, fucking terrified out of our minds. And yet all that time, nothing happened. After seemingly endless hours of nonstop assault, just as we were about to collapse, we were marched out to the center racks and finally allowed to sleep for an hour or two. And at first I was too scared to sleep, and I cried quietly in my rack. I was exactly where I had thought I wanted to be, and now all I wanted was to go home. I knew boot camp was going to be tough, but I had no idea how tough until that first night. I cried myself to sleep.
One day during the first week of boot camp, when we were taking our academic tests, the drill instructor showed us a chart of MOSs, military occupational specialties, or job descriptions. One of the DIs said, when you complete this form, at the top right-hand corner, write in the 3 MOS fields that you'd like to be considered for. Well, that was a no-brainer for me. I put 0300, 0300, 0300, infantry, infantry, and infantry. I didn't join the Marine Corps to drive a truck. I didn't join to type at a desk. and I certainly didn't join to play in the Marine Corps band. So I didn't tell them that I could play a musical instrument. I joined the Marine Corps to be the ultimate Marine. The heart and soul of the Corps is the rifleman. They called riflemen the hub of the wheel. Everyone else was considered spokes that supported the hub. From the day forward for the rest of boot camp, I was terrified I was going to end up a cook. I lived in fear that I would be dropped because I'd never been an athlete and wasn't nearly as fit as some of the other recruits. But during boot camp, I realized what the scouts had done for me with all the swimming, physical activity, and endurance tests. At boot camp, I discovered I could do things I thought never possible. As a child, I learned about the draft as soon as I was old enough to learn about duty and obligation. I knew that I owed my country 2 years of military service, and the only choice in the matter I had was to select the branch of service. Of course, if there hadn't been a draft, most of my buddies wouldn't have joined the Marine Corps. The reason they joined was to exercise what little choice they had. Many came from families and with fathers and grandfathers who had served in the Corps. Others simply felt that the training they got in the Corps would give them a better chance of returning home alive. They preferred the Corps to the other services, but given a choice, they would have preferred to stay home with their girlfriends, work a shit job stacking groceries, and maybe earn enough money to buy a car. They would have preferred to grow up slowly, learn from their mistakes, and live regular lives. To me, that was doom. I wanted a life of adventure and challenge. But there are 58,000 names engraved in black marble in Washington, D.C., commemorating the sacrifices of young men who, because of the draft, had entered the war against their wishes, since they couldn't afford to go to college. When I joined the Corps, I was exactly where I wanted to be, and yet I was still terrified and secretly hoping they were going to discover that I had some strange disease that would send me home with honor. Those first few hellish weeks of boot camp, I kept praying, "Give me something, God. Visit me with sickness." But eventually, as I got stronger and the platoon got better and more resilient, I stopped having these thoughts and began to take pride in what was starting to happen to us.
The day it really came together for the platoon, we were out on the grinder, the big asphalt parking lot where we drilled. On this hot summer day, it was like walking on a skillet over fire. We were doing some type of drill, and the drill instructors were yelling at us, "One heel, one heel. I want to hear one heel strike the ground." This meant we shouldn't sound like a centipede or with 100 legs moving at different times. We needed to move our feet in unison. To this point, we still hadn't found our rhythm, which isn't something that can be taught. It's something intuitive, like a sixth sense. You can't understand until it happens. We were forming our manual arms on march, slapping our M14s. They had nice hardwood stocks. To prepare us for slapping the stock of our rifles, the DIs had us on our hands and knees, slapping the grinder as hard as we could until our hands were rough and tight. They yelled, one hand, one heel." Then unexpectedly, the training began to take hold and everyone fell into place. Suddenly, as we marched, our feet moved in unison. And for the first time, we were a real platoon. We instantly knew that we had risen above the level of maggots and turds. We were Marine recruits, and if they didn't kill us in the process, we were going to take it to the other side. In that moment, a whole new attitude took hold of us.
Suddenly, we were standing up straighter, our shoulders squared, our heads high, our eyes fixed in a permanent Clint Eastwood squint. It's hard to describe the feeling, a mixture of pride and profound relief of finally belonging to a platoon and knowing that no matter what awaited us in Southeast Asia, we were now part of the greatest and most iconic fighting force the world has ever seen. Marines aren't taught to march in a straight line. Marines move with purpose. And that is what we started to do that hot summer day on the meat grinder. Although our transformation was far from complete, it had begun.
Book 2, The Kill Zone. 3 days after arriving in Vietnam and being assigned to an infantry platoon attached to a military police battalion in Da Nang, I pulled my first night patrol. I was nervous as hell, having heard that night patrols were among the most terrifying missions in the war. So they put me in the center of the squad. It was a moonlit night, so I had some visibility. Most nights on night patrol were like sticking your head up a black cat's ass. You couldn't see anything. But that first time out, I could see fairly well, and whenever the point held up his left fist or dropped down to signal danger, I had no trouble tracking it. In boot camp, we trained for night patrols by learning to pass the word. The drill instructor would whisper something to the first guy in the column, and then he had to whisper it down the line. By the time it got to the last guy, it didn't in any way resemble what had been said up front. So we learned the importance of passing the word. Over time, we got pretty good at it. And that night on my first patrol, when I saw the guy in front of me squat and then scoot out a bit, my ears trained in on him, and I heard him whisper, "Checkpoints, check." So we took our positions so he could watch the guy in front of him, and I waited and waited for him to say something or signal back to me. I was staring at him intently, locked on, but he wasn't moving. So eventually I went, "Psst, psst," but he didn't answer my psst. So I scooted ahead a bit and stood in a bush. At this point, not only was I lost, but all the guys behind me were lost because of me, and I started to panic. And then I remembered what I had been taught in boot camp, that panic kills more Marines than bullets. And I decided to just squat down where I was and didn't move. I was the new guy, and I was convinced that I had just proven myself to be one dumb motherfucker. 5 humiliating minutes passed before they came back and found me. And the whole time I was thinking, boy, are they going to chew me up now? But they didn't say a word. We just went on with the patrol as if nothing happened.
It would be my first night under fire, and I did not react well. When we started to take fire, I discovered that incoming tracers, when aimed directly at me, are a hell of a lot scarier than outgoing tracers. No amount of training can really prepare you for it. Of course, downrange, when the rounds are coming at you, it's a whole different ballgame. But that first night on patrol, I kept thinking, why is he shooting at me? I've never done anything to him. I felt more like a terrified child on a playground than an automatic rifleman upon whom the squad was depending. The rounds were coming in, and for some reason, I bypassed the selector switch on my rifle, which adjusts the weapon to automatic mode. I was supposed to be putting bullets downrange with my automatic rifle, but while the rest of the guys fired more shots, I had frozen up and wasn't doing my job. Squad leader yelled at me to shoot, and I pretended I couldn't hear him because I was paralyzed with fear. He came over and kicked me hard and screamed, "Fire your weapon!" At this point, I was more afraid of him than of the guy who was shooting at me. Suddenly, my hand sprang into action, and I started firing downrange. The whole thing only lasted a few seconds. Nobody got hit, but to me, it had been the Battle of Gettysburg in Vietnam. It had embarrassed me even more than it had scared me.
On the way back from patrol, I was one sad puppy. I knew I was going to get ripped by these guys when we debriefed after the patrol. When it came time to talk about what happened, all that the squad leader said was, "We got separated. The chain broke with you." And I said, "Yeah." I thought I was looking right at him, but it turned out to be a bush, to which he said, "You did a great job." And I thought, wait a minute, it's coming. He's going to call you a dumb shit. But instead he said, "You did the right thing. You stayed stock still. You didn't move. This happens to everybody. And when it does, don't move. If you move, you won't be where we expect you to be, or you'll end up bumping into each other or shooting at each other. You were right to stay where you were." Then my squad leader looked me up and down. He asked me if I was okay, and I said, he asked me if I was okay and said, "I kicked you awful hard." I told him I was okay and that I needed a kick and express how sorry I was that it happened. "Don't worry about it," he said. "This is scary shit. Now you know what it's like and you got it out of your system. Just don't do it again. You're an automatic rifleman for a reason, and we need you out there.
The rest of the guys teased me, which was fine. And a few of them came up and said, man, I did worse than that the first time. It was a good feeling to be with this group of guys and know I could fuck up. If I'd fucked up like that in training, I would have been thrashed by the drill instructors and people would have given me an unlimited amount of horse shit. These guys were professionals. They told me to focus on what I did right and next time do both things right. And I did.
I think the reason that the first guy I killed bothered me so much was because we were very close together. If he had been 10 meters away when I shot him, it might have been better for me. Then I would have been a little more in control of my fear. But as it stood, when I saw him only a few feet away, I just stared at him, really taking him in. I didn't know not to then. And he felt it. He turned his head and looked right at me, right in the fucking eye. I have no idea what he could see. Even though I was down hiding in the foliage, it felt like I had been set in the middle of a big open field and I was the only thing to see. I had my selector switch on my M14 on full automatic. So right when he looked, the rifle went off. I mean, that's the way I describe it because I did not make a conscious decision to squeeze the trigger. If my training hadn't taken over, he very likely would have killed me because I would have just sat there and waited to see what he was going to do. When I shot him, I experienced an immediate sensory overload. My brain could not process all of the information it was receiving. Prior to my first kill, there had been two other big firsts in my life. First time I kissed a girl at the Sugar Creek swimming pool. When we finished kissing, I wasn't sure if it had happened. So I thought, great, go for another one. Let's see if it really happened. And the next big one was my first jump out of a plane. I didn't remember the exit at all. No memory whatsoever. One second I was in the door, the next I was under the canopy thinking, holy shit, what just happened?
It was the same with my first kill. Next thing I knew, I was up and standing over him, but I don't remember getting up. I could hear a voice coming out of my throat, which didn't seem like it was mine, screaming and terrified. If you move, I'll kill you. And the guy was trying to breathe through the holes I had blown through his chest. He'd take in a breath and then it would blow out of those holes in a bloody froth, almost pink. This was accompanied by a horrible gurgling sound. I've never been able to get it out of my head. He was trying hard to cling to life, struggling to breathe, and then I watched the light go out in his eyes. And it struck me that I was the last thing on this earth that guy saw before he died. I hadn't yet learned to dehumanize the enemy. This was a guy. I thought about if his mom and dad could see me standing over his dead body, or maybe his grandpa and grandparents, what would they think of me? I'd been fantasizing about killing people since I was a little kid. All of my heroes killed people. I was a Marine infantry rifleman, I thought, and I was going to kill people. I was going to be a real man. Only there I was, and I had done it, and the reality was nothing like the fantasy. Killing didn't bother Errol Flynn or John Wayne or Steve McQueen, my cowboy heroes. I thought it was going to be cool. I thought I was going to feel great. Right then, standing over that man's body, a flood of thoughts came rushing into my head. I could go to prison for this. I might go to hell for it. What the fuck am I supposed to do now? I can't tell mom and dad about this. Something wasn't right. I was supposed to feel good. I'd always known this moment was coming. I had looked forward to it. Now that it was finally here, I wanted to go home. I wasn't a big bad Marine. I was a teenage kid who just wanted his mother to tell him, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. You'll never have to do this again. But I knew that would never happen. This was the life I had dreamt of. This was the life I had pursued. If only he could have been farther away. It's strange how different things feel up close when you have proximity to human suffering. And there's another thing about killing. It's a lot easier to do when you're terrified. And it gets easier when you learn what is at stake. That every time you squeeze the trigger, you may be saving the life of another grunt. Every dead NVA or VC is one less NVA or VC to be killing Marines. And that was consoling. If you somehow lost the fear, it would feel like another day at the office, but I could never lose that fear. I was always scared, but that kept my hatred pure. Sometimes I wonder if any of us would have volunteered if they had put the real experience of killing in our comic books.
The first time I saw combat with the NVA, it was a baptism of fire. These guys were completely invisible. We could be eating bread off them and still couldn't see them. And they were firing full fucking automatic. They had AK-47s, SKSs, RPGs, RPG-7s that fired B-40 rockets. Meanwhile, the Marines had taken away our 3.5-inch rocket launchers, or super bazookas, as they had been, and we had been given Laws rockets, which were 66mm disposable light anti-tank rounds. It was basically a telescoping tube that dispatched the rocket. You pull a pin on it, pop off the end, and then you'd reach up and squeeze the trigger mechanism, which was supposed to send an electrical charge to arm a rocket, and it didn't work. And you had a useless armed rocket with you, and you couldn't leave it, because if you did, the NVA would use it. So they turn them into booby traps that would kill another Marine. So you had to hang onto the son of a bitch, which was really fucking awkward, because you might be carrying it up to 3 of them, like their AKs had some great rocket launcher. We had this piece of shit that was like our rifle, undependable. When a bullet whizzes by you, traveling faster than sound, it doesn't go doing or ka-chow as it does on TV. It makes a real loud crack, as if you're really close to it. It stings, because that crack is a little sonic boom. It's traveling so quickly through the air that it causes that the air closes in behind it, and you hear crack. By the time you hear it, it's past you or in you. When a bullet travels by you so close it stings, there are no words to describe how terrifying it is. And this thing, when you go to ground in the bush, nobody can see you. What happens next, and whether or not you're going to do your job, is just between you and God. It's really hard to be brave when nobody's watching. When someone is shooting at you, especially when they're close, it's easy to get rational, and reason can make a coward out of a man. When you're terrified and you want to live, it's only reasonable for you not to lift up your head and pick up your rifle and shoot back, so that people know exactly where you are and then fire more in your direction. It's rational and logical according to everything you've been raised to think, not to jump up, expose yourself in a firefight, even though that's what it's going to take to keep your buddies and maybe you alive. When someone is hurt and screaming in the dark, it's only reasonable to think, I can't help him. If I'm dead or wounded, it's probably better for me to stay right here so the enemy doesn't know where I am. Your mind can come up with all kinds of rationalizations for you not to do what a Marine should do in a firefight, and reason that make a coward of me more times than I wish to admit. But the bravest thing I ever did were where nobody could see them, and that was all the more terrifying.
The NVA only made contact if they were sure they had the advantage. If you were in a squad, they would only initiate if they had a platoon. If you were in a platoon, then they'd have a company or a battalion. If you had a battalion, then they wouldn't make contact until they had a regiment. So whenever they did decide to hit us, they did it when they were very close, and always when they wanted to initiate and not when we wanted them to initiate. Almost every major fight I was in with the NVA, they initiated with an ambush. It was their fucking yard, and they were the masters of the L shape and the horseshoe ambush. And when they hit us at night, North Vietnamese sappers or combat engineers could crawl silently through our razor wire and tanglefoot and through fields saturated with bouncing Betty mines and toe poppers, and we wouldn't know they were there until they were inside the wire of our position, throwing hand grenades and satchel charges into our holes and bunkers. We called them ghosts and phantoms, and we meant it. To this day, I'm still afraid of the dark. Sometimes we would find their bodies and they would still be wearing loincloths. If they had been wearing uniforms, we would have seen them, but they stripped off their clothes, lubricated themselves by coating their skin in grease from head to toe, and slid through barbed wire and tripwires. They could somehow get through all of our defenses without being snagged. They'd also have tourniquets on each arm above the elbow and on each leg above the knee, so that if they lost an extremity, they could cinch down the tourniquet and stay in the fight. That's hardcore. I was constantly stepping on barbed wire and tripwires as we were setting up, but those guys could somehow get through them without being snagged. We'd find boxes in the bush with their names on them, filled with hair clippings and fingernails. These were little sacrifice boxes because they figured they were never going to return once they entered the perimeter. And so they wanted to leave something behind that could be sent home and buried. That's how committed they were. And that's what made them so frightening. Every time we went out, we did so with equipment we couldn't trust, outnumbered by an enemy that were more motivated than we were, because they were fighting for their own cause in their own land. We were plenty motivated too, since the majority of us were volunteers and considered ourselves professional warriors. Motivation was never a problem for us in 1967. But we felt like the NVA had almost everything going their way, and that could be dispiriting at times. Since I shot my mouth off about being a point man, I would get told to walk point on a lot of patrols. And every time I walked point, I carried my rifle with the selector switch on rock and roll. I figured if I got hit, I'd need to lay down that first magazine of bullets on full auto to try and distract them. I always fixed my bayonet and had it ready in case my rifle didn't work. And I pulled out a hand grenade and kept it in easy reach. When walking point, I just expected to get hit. And the more I did it, the harder it became to shake the feeling that it was just a matter of time.
By late September, I quit marking my short timer calendar, which most of us carried around to count the days we had left on our deployment. I knew I wasn't going to make it, and every time I marked up the calendar, I felt like an idiot. Because of the casualties we'd taken, our saying was, in 1-9, you're never short, you're always next. If you were short, it meant you were going home soon, but we could take no comfort in being short timers because we knew that the chances of our becoming casualties were very high. And most of us had already been wounded more than once, so the saying turned out to be certain for me and for most of my buddies. Part of the burden of being a survivor is that I discarded my future pretty early on in the bush. I realized my future was nothing more than a pipe dream, and if you lived for your future or some fantasy of what it might be, you were not going to do anything to jeopardize it, which meant you were not going to do everything your buddies needed you to do in a firefight. All the hope of having a future does is slow you down. In combat, it's best to throw it away. So I discarded the concept of a future. And once you do that, it's difficult to ever reclaim it. When I survived the war and finally made it home, try as I did, I couldn't make myself unthink that the future was bullshit, a pipe dream. It was never real to me again until I had my first child in 1984. That was the moment when I began to believe in a future again for the first time since returning from Vietnam. It was a future worth fighting for, and it belonged to my son. I ended up having other children, and they all had futures, which were more important than anything in my life. And they helped me to believe in the future even more. But for all those years after I came home and before they were born, if I had money, I spent it. If I had food, I ate it, just like in the bush. When I was told I'd be walking point and had been saving a can of peaches in my cargo pocket, I'd say, hold on a minute. And I'd immediately open that fucking can of peaches and snarf it down right there because I didn't want the NVA to go through my pockets and take my peaches or eat my pound cake. Peaches and pound cake was my favorite sea ration dessert. Wasn't meant to be dessert. Peaches were packed separately from the pound cake, but the bush taught us to be creative when it came to cuisine.
During my time in Vietnam, I learned to spell infantry M-I-S-E-R-Y. That's what we called it. Our helmets were our billboards, and I'd written on the back of mine, Missouri is the state I'm from, but misery is the state I'm in. We were always hungry in the bush, and we were always thirsty, except during the monsoon season, but then we'd be freezing our asses off. We'd get immersion foot, a condition that develops when feet are kept wet in soggy or muddy boots for days. When the outer layer of skin absorbs enough water, it begins to rot off, which made it almost impossible to keep flesh on our feet. And we were in the infantry, so we walked everywhere, which meant you would be walking on raw meat. And you wouldn't get to take your boots off very often because a barefoot American is a defenseless American. One of the first things the North Vietnamese would do when they captured an American was take away his boots, because they knew we couldn't handle the bush barefoot, and they could. By the time you finally got a chance to take off your boots, your socks came off in strips, and chunks of socks would be stuck inside your boots, and parts of socks would be stuck to sores on your feet. You had to peel them off, which meant opening the wounds anew. One of the things that a couple of my buddies and I would do every morning was see who could drain the most pus out of their jungle rot ulcers. Out in the bush, our utility trousers rotted off from the knees up, across the groin, down to the other knee, because we sweated so much. And whenever we were wet, everything ended up in the groin area. It wouldn't dry well, so the seams there would give way first. We didn't wear underwear in the bush because if you did, it would give you horrible rashes, rashes that would turn into pussy sores from jungle rot. So you learned pretty quick, don't wear skivvies in the bush. And you'd tell your new guys as soon as they got there, take those skivvies off and use them for shit paper because they're going to hurt you if you keep wearing them. In every sea ration meal, you would get a little tiny packet of semi-water resistant toilet paper about the size of a pack of cigarettes, which was right on the edge of worthless and felt like wiping your ass with wax paper. So the skivvies, which made of cloth and absorbent, came in handy for at least once use as a shit paper, but if you wore them as clothing, they'd trap moisture and hasten jungle rot. When your groin is exposed to nature and everything in it, you're going to catch things there. Every bandolier of ammunition would come with one black safety pin on it. I took to saving those safety pins so I could try to pin my trousers closed when they would rot. The problem with rotting cloth is you can run a pin through it, but then the cloth will give way around the pin. So you are constantly adjusting to keep your trousers from rotting off.
We were always hungry and thirsty in the bush. We always had diarrhea. And if you scratched a mosquito bite, in 24 hours, you would have a pus-filled sore. The mosquitoes were so thick and big over there, we had a joke that the mosquitoes in Vietnam were big enough to stand flat-footed on a rice paddy and fuck a turkey in his ass. That's teenage grunt humor for you. The mosquitoes were huge, and the female Anopheles mosquito was the one that gave you malaria. It would stick its back legs in the air and spread them when it bit you. So we call it being bitten by a bitch or by the whore. If you're lucky, you had insect repellent and but you weren't always lucky. And since the repellent would only keep them about an inch away from you, and they were so loud, hovering that so close to your head, and that buzzing like crazy would get you scared that you would not hear the enemy. Sometimes after falling asleep at night, you would wake up with so many mosquito bites on your hands that you had to work your fingers in order to bend them, or your lips and eyelids, which were soft and filled with blood, would swell up twice their size, punctured by dozens of bites. There are a few things that a grunt in Asia learns to hate: mosquitoes, because they were so big, and rats, as big as Shetland ponies, because they live off of corpses, and leeches, because you can't keep them off you, and they're blood-sucking parasites. There would be times when I'd have 20 leeches on me at one time. I've had guys tell me they had over 30 because they were attached to you. You couldn't stop to remove them. You had to keep doing your job. A lot of guys said they never felt them, but I could feel them whenever they latched on, and it hurt. The leeches would attach themselves all over you. They'd attach to your armpits. They'd congregate in the groin. They'd burrow into your scalp. They liked areas where there was some pressure. They get inside your waistband latch on and they would excrete anticoagulant so your blood wouldn't harden up and it would continue to flow. If you managed to get one off, then you'd have a big bleeding hole where where the leech had been. And by the time you walked 10 meters, there'd be another leech back in the same hole. You never got one leech, you got covered by them. And when you finally stopped long enough to take your insect repellent and squirt them, they'd drop off right away, but it was like pouring salt into it on an open wound. Some guys would light a cigarette and burn them off. And then, and that was real effective if you were in a place where you could take a chance on the smell of a cigarette. A cigarette could be smelled a long way off and would serve as a warning that somebody was nearby. Tigers and monkeys don't smoke cigarettes. So when you smelled a cigarette, it wasn't from someone smoking nearby, it usually meant danger. So you couldn't always light a cigarette. But when you could, you get all those leeches off, and then they would have, and then you'd have all these open wounds that wouldn't scab, and then they would just keep bleeding. They would climb onto your testicles, and you'd burn them off, and the blood would be flowing from there. And you'd go back to work, trying to concentrate on your job because you wanted to live another day.
One of the worst things in the bush, on top of the sheer misery of the physical conditions, is the absolute terror of being on a night ambush or being assigned to a listening post. If you stared at a rock long enough in the dark, it would get up and move, and that would scare you damn near enough to make your heart stop. It was an illusion, but it still scared the shit out of me. For the listening post, they'd always get 3 guys with a radio and send them as far as 1,000 meters away, though we seldom ever go that far, even if we were told to go that far. They'd send us out to the perimeter, and our job would be to listen for the enemy. There were several ways the unit would know if the enemy was out there. One was that they would hear the enemy and would have enough time to call in and warn them that the enemy was coming. Then we'd ask for permission to come back inside the perimeter wire, and 99% of the time, permission would be denied. Another was that the enemy would discover us, overrun us, and kill us, and that would notify the perimeter that the enemy was there. And finally, there were the times when the enemy would be right next to us in the dark, so close that we could reach out and grab them. Even if we were able to somehow signal back to the unit that they were there, we couldn't break contact because we were there with NVA. They would come so close some nights that we could hear them whispering to each other as they looked for us in the dark. You'd be holding the handset to your ear really hard because you were terrified that the CP was going to call, having not heard from you in a while, and say, Delta Lima Papa 3 Bravo, which meant Delta Company, listening post, 3rd Platoon, 2nd Squad. If your sit rep is Alpha Sierra, key your handset twice. If your situation report is all secure, break squelch twice on the handset. And if you didn't make any sound, they might keep thinking you're asleep. So then they would keep asking you if your sit rep is Alpha Sierra. But then it would finally dawn on them, maybe there was somebody too close for you to say anything. So then they would say, if your sit rep is negative, Alpha Sierra, key your handset once. And you damn near squeezed the handle off the handset. You knew that if you didn't hold that handset up to your ear hard enough, the NVA that were close enough that you could hear them whispering would hear over that radio, and you would be as good as dead.
So when you got a listening post, you felt like you were getting a death sentence. And in the bush, you get 1, 2, or 3 times a week. It was terrifying shit. There wasn't a moment when I was in the bush, especially when I was in 1-9, when I wasn't scared to death. Most of the time, I was scared senseless. In Vietnam, we measured fear on a scale called the pucker factor. We discovered that our assholes puckered when we were scared. So the pucker factor was devised as a way to communicate our fear level to another Marine. Now, the best pucker factor report I ever heard was when a buddy declared that he was so scared you couldn't ram a straight pin up my ass with a sledgehammer. The pucker factor was on a scale of 1 to 10, but there were times when your pucker factor would be a 20. A guy might tell you, the pucker factor was so bad it turned me inside out. And you know that he was fucking terrified. We were dealing in ultimate realities out there on the listening posts, and there always came a point at which we were no longer dealing with reality. Reality was dealing with us.
On the flight to Delta Med to Dong Ha, the portside gunner held my hand. Every time I started to fade, he squeezed it hard, pulling me back from death. If I had slipped away into unconsciousness, I would never have come back. And so when we landed, I was afraid to let go of his hand. He had to climb off the helicopter with me before he finally wrestled loose of my death grip. He was wearing a visor, and I wouldn't recognize him now if he walked up and punched me in the nose. But I'll never forget the way he looked at me before jumping back onto that CH-34 and taking off to collect more dying Marines. They carried me into Delta Med and placed my stretcher on sawhorses. The place was strewn with wounded men. And I thought, okay, maybe there's a chance I'll make it. I've somehow made it this far. I looked over at Blair, who was laid out beside me on my right, and I could see the bullet hole in the right side of his chest. He was unconscious, and that scared the shit out of me because I believed he was dead. Then a doctor came over and inspected me. I was awake and alert. He methodically checked me over, taking in the gaping hole in my chest. He looked me square in the eyes and asked, "What's your religion, Marine?" "I'm a Protestant," I replied, and he shouted, "Get a chaplain over here. I can't help this man." That was when I thought, this really is it, the end of the line. There were so many wounded guys screaming and struggling for life, and there was so much blood that it looked like Delta Med had been painted red. They pulled my St. Christopher out of the hole in my chest and told me that it had been resting against my heart. It was stained purple from soaking in my blood. This chaplain came over and started to pray by my head, but then another surgeon, a red-headed doctor in a blood-stained t-shirt, walked by, and as he passed, I, having been raised in the Midwest always to be polite, smiled at him and nodded. The surgeon stopped, looked at me, and shouted, "Why isn't somebody helping this man?" And I thought, yeah, why isn't somebody helping this man? The chaplain stepped aside, and the surgeon started working on me, giving orders. They still hadn't found my dog tags because they were in my pocket, so he said, "What's your blood type?" And when I told him, he shouted, "Get me blood right now." And all of a sudden, all kinds of guys were handling me again. Then he turned to me and said, "I'm sorry, Marine, but I'm going to have to hurt you. When you've got a chest wound, they can't give you morphine because it would depress your respiratory system. So you have to eat all the pain." But I hadn't had any morphine, and in my mind, there was nothing that doctor could do that hadn't already been done. He cut my side open and stuck something inside that separated my ribs. Then he shoved a tube right into my pleural cavity to drain all the blood in which I'd been drowning. My breaths came a little easier then in tight little gasps. I didn't think I had any screams left in me, but as it turned out, I had one last big one. I'd been saving for that moment. It started down at the bottom of my feet, climbed all the way up and out my throat until all the air had left my body. It was one of those horrible, sickening screams that you never want to hear, let alone coming from your own mouth. To this day, I don't know where I got the air to produce it. A senior doctor at Delta Med came over and said, "We can't do anything for you here." So they loaded me along with Blair onto a big 4-engine C-130 and flew us to Alpha Med, a hospital in Fubai. We were miraculously still alive, and we were the only guys on that cavernous plane, except for a corpsman who kept changing out our blood bags. As quickly as he hung one, the blood flowed right out of us, and he had to hang another. All the while, I was praying for my family. All this time, I was still conscious. I had to be, and without morphine, I just had to eat all the pain, all the while praying for my family.
When we landed at Alpha Med, 4 Marines ran in, grabbed my stretcher and started carrying me down a ramp. I knew my buddy Patrick Van Buren had been wounded at Kongtin and was down at Alpha Med because he had written me from there. So as the Marines were carrying my stretcher down the ramp, feet first, I lifted my head and said to them, "Van Buren." It was all I could find the breath to say. There were thousands of guys at Fubai, but to my amazement, he immediately replied, "Patrick?" And I said, "Yeah, get him." and they called another Marine over to help carry the stretcher. And while he sprinted off to find Pat, next thing I remember, one of my best friends in the world walked into the receiving at Alpha Med, ran over to me and grabbed my hand. It was Patrick. I'm here, Muskie. I'm here. I knew I was dying, but it filled me with such joy to see him. I told him I was dying, and then they took me into the x-ray and flopped me around. Flopped me around so goddamn much I didn't know if I could take any more pain. But Pat stayed with me the whole time, holding my hand and reassuring me with his presence. They wheeled me into surgery and told Pat he had to get out. You're going to have to throw me out of here, he said to them. That's my buddy. And so they said, okay, stay in here if you want, but put a mask on. One of the thoracic specialists, a lieutenant commander, led the surgery. As he put me to sleep, I thought, boy, this is really it. Okay, God, into your hands I deliver my spirit. I just gave my soul to Christ and I'm relaxed. I didn't have to fight anymore. I don't have to do everything. I've done everything I could do, and I simply had nothing left to give, which came as a great relief. Finally, all the pain, all the fear, everything I had been terrified me the past 11 and a half months, I could let go. I believe I had died, that I was dead. So when I woke up in the Kwanzaa hut in a surgical intensive care ward with a Catholic priest standing at the end of my bed reciting Latin, it got a bit surreal. Apparently, they had seen my St. Christopher medal and presumed I was Catholic. As I listened to them administer what I assumed were last rites, I looked up at the priest and said, "Excuse me, Father, but I don't think I need that." To which he replied, "Well, of course you don't," flashing me a big-ass smile. I couldn't believe I was still alive. I wasn't out of the woods yet, but I definitely was looking at the woods. I later learned that they called the surgeon the miracle worker. He certainly worked a miracle on me that day. His name was Lieutenant Commander Dr. Powell.
Eventually, after many days in intensive care, I was wheeled into surgery so they could close up my chest. The hole was so big, they couldn't stretch the skin over it. One round had vaporized 2 of my ribs and a fist-sized chunk of my pectorals and trapezius. Another round had lodged next to my spine, and they took that one out through my back. The surgeon had to use wire to suture the holes, but I could still look inside the cavity because they weren't able to force the skin to come together. I had wire in my chest in 2 places because they had put another chest tube in, one up top and one down below. I also had wire sutures in my side and down my back, right between my shoulder blades. If the bullet had entered 1/2 inch to the left, it would have severed my spine. After they wired me up, they loaded me onto a medevac and flew me up to Da Nang, where I recovered for a few days before they flew me to Tachikawa, Japan, where I went straight into the surgery ward again because my condition was still pretty questionable. Then they put me on a plane. On the flight, I had a nurse assigned to me who was also assigned to another kid in my section. We were both fucked up, but he was in far worse shape than I. He had shrapnel lodged in his heart, but somehow was still alive. There had been a lot of news stories written about this poor kid who had been hit at Cantien and was on his way home to see his parents and his girl who were waiting for him at Scott Air Force Base in St. Louis. On the way, we stopped at a hospital in the Philippines. They wheeled us off the plane and into receiving, where we were greeted by a bunch of American girls. They were dependents, children of military families stationed there, and I was told they were on a tour of the hospital. At this point, I still had Cantien mud all over me, and I couldn't remember when I had last washed my hair or when I had last shaved. And now, for the first time in damn near a year, I was looking at American girls, and they were looking back at us, horrified. It was only a quick exchange, as we were immediately wheeled off to X-ray and then the surgery ward, but I'll never forget it.
Next, we were flown to Alaska, from which we were flown to Scott Air Force Base just outside of St. Louis. We were flown there because it was the closest airstrip to the Great Lakes Naval Hospital. When we landed, they wheeled the other Marine off the plane and put a curtain stand around his stretcher. We were all in the same ward. The only privacy they could give him was the curtain. His family was waiting for him there. His girlfriend walked up and went behind the curtain, and as soon as he saw her, he died. He had held on all that way with shrapnel in his heart, only to die when he arrived home. He just wanted to see his girl one last time. I spent the night at Scott Air Force Base, where the Red Cross had set up a phone bank from which I was allowed to call home. They told me I only had 3 minutes to talk, but I remember the Red Cross lady coming up to me and saying, "Don't worry about it. Talk as long as you want." So I got to talk to my mom, and it meant the world to hear her voice. The next day, they flew me to the Great Lakes Naval Hospital in Chicago, which was an approximately 30-minute flight from St. Louis. When we landed, it was late at night. The airstrip was pitch black, and they quickly moved me through the receiving into X-ray and took me up to the surgery ward. On the way, I passed dozens of guys in the hallways on gurneys, but I was lucky enough to get a rack on the surgery ward.
While he was performing my exam, I asked the medical officer, "Why'd you bring us in so late, Doc?" There had been something awkward and strange about being wheeled into this huge hospital naked under a sheet after midnight. We'd all been raised on films in which the wounded came home from World War II and Korea and were met by marching bands and cheering crowds, welcoming them home. By contrast, it felt like we were being snuck in under the cover of night, as if they didn't want us to be seen. "It's for your protection," the medical officer replied. "What?" I said. "I don't need protection. I'm home." And he said, "We had people gathering out here, throwing things and screaming obscenities and insults as they unloaded the wounded from the planes. So they just started bringing you guys in late at night." It took a little while for the reality of what he was telling me to sink in. When I left for Vietnam, the peace movement hadn't really taken off. They weren't holding giant marches yet. That all started in '67. On the deceptively short voyage home, all I could think about was how lucky I was to be returning to the safety and comfort of Independence, Missouri, to the warm embrace of my family and friends, and the support of neighbors and teachers and citizens who had beamed with pride when I deployed. But as I mulled over the word protection, it slowly dawned on me that the America I had left behind when I shipped out for Vietnam was not the America to which I had returned. The country had changed. Though I had been away for less than a year, it seemed like I had arrived in another decade. And I never felt like I was home, really home, ever again.
Notes to the man who shot me. When the ambush was sprung, everything became chaos. In the initial burst of fire, our platoon hit the deck, all except Leonard, who stayed up and fought until he was shot in the chest. He collapsed like a puppet with his strings cut. He collapsed like a puppet with his strings cut. As your battalion held us under fire, Sloan suddenly leapt over us like a runner clearing the high hurdles, calling out Leonard's name. As I got up to follow Sloan, you fired your first burst at me. A ricochet clipped my chin and dropped me face first to the ground. You were a veteran. You knew that Marines never leave their wounded, and that's when I became your bait. You held your fire until one of my buddies came to me and began to lift me by my shoulders before you walked that second burst into my chest. Do you recall how the impact of those bullets tore me screaming from his arms? I think you shot him too. You may have shot others before you were killed and I was rescued. If you did, you made me your accomplice in the fight against my friends. and that haunts me to this day. I have often thought of you all these years and hated you for using me as bait. But the truth is, had our roles been reversed, I would have done the same. I wish now I could talk to you. I wonder how I look to you. I wonder, were you as terrified as I was? I wonder, did you hate me as much as I hated you? I wonder how long you've been fighting your war. I wonder if you had any children. And I wonder, had you survived and we met today, would you speak to me? I sometimes imagine us meeting again and talking about that ambush while our children play together. You were a good soldier. I've come to realize that you and I had more in common than we did with the men who sent us to kill each other. If I could, I would give you the gift that I have longed for all these years, the gift of peace.
Thank you so much, John, for your reading of the Notes to the Man Who Shot Me. Thank you so much to our actors and readers for their amazing readings of John's book tonight. If we were in a live setting, I know there would be uproarious applause from all the people tuning in from all over the country and the world, but all you have is me and my immense gratitude to all of you for your contributions tonight. I want to thank Oscar Isaac. I want to thank David Strathairn. I want to thank Gregory D. Gadson, Ashleigh Byrnes, and of course, John Musgrave for everything you gave to us tonight. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute honor being with you over the last hour and hearing your reading. We're going to put you guys in the audience now, but I hope that you can relax and stick around and hear the conversation that will follow. And again, I'm sending you my immense gratitude and excitement for whenever we do this again, which I hope will be soon. Thank you so much. John, please stick around. And of course, Ashleigh and Greg, stick around, but David and Oscar, we're going to put you in the audience, and I know we'll see you both again soon. Thank you all so much. As we put David and Oscar in the audience, we're going to bring up the rest of our panelists. And once our panelists are all with us, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and launch directly into their gut responses to what they heard and saw tonight that resonated with them and spoke to them. Before we do that, however, I just want to plant the first seed of the first question I'm going to ask you as a larger audience tuning in tonight. It's a question we ask often after our performances, and it's a question that feels appropriate tonight as well. And so we'd love for you to think about this question. And then as soon as the panelists are done with their gut responses to what they heard that spoke to them, we'll come back out to you, our audience, and we'll bring some of you up onto the screen into dialogue with some of the folks who are up here now. So here's the question we'd love for you to think about. This stirring memoir by John Musgrave was written mostly about his experiences now well over 50 years ago in the Vietnam War and its aftermath. To be clear, we only performed sections 1 and 2 of the book, but there's a third section equally powerful that talks about John's return to civilian life and joining the anti-war movement, and lots of things we'll probably get into tonight, but we wanted to give you something to respond to and not go for hours upon hours. In spite of the distance of time that separates us from the time period that John described, what I'd love for you to think about is what touched you tonight, what resonated with you in the reading, what spoke to you, what was true. And we'll return to our audience in just a second, but first we're going to go over to our panel. Michael, do you mind going first, unmuting and going first? I know your wife is there and she's going to hopefully unmute you right now.
I don't mind at all.
Thank you so much, Michael. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and launching directly into your comment.
I'm Michael Naranjo. I'm Native American. I live in north central New Mexico, and I was in the Army. I was at the old French fort in Vietnam. We traveled by helicopter every time we went out. And every time I hear a helicopter today, it sends me right back there. And I remember being in a training course in Vietnam and here in the States before we went over. And I looked at these 2 young trainees who who had come back from Vietnam, and there was a hardness about them. And I looked at my fellow recruits, and there was a difference, and I couldn't figure it out. And when I ended up in Vietnam after a couple of weeks, I realized what it was. When you saw the new recruits coming in, you go to any university, college, you look at these freshmen, these sophomores, and those were our soldiers. The day I got hurt, there was a cameraman and a priest, and we went out looking for the enemy that shelled us that night. And somehow you develop this shell to preserve your sanity. And remember, on the day that I first discovered that was when I walked up to this thatch hut, and there was this old man sitting there offering me tea. And I had my M16 pointed right at him, and I made him drink his own tea. And that moment, I realized that I was no longer that innocent young man that had ended up in Vietnam. On the day that I was injured, I was walking point 2.5 weeks after I got there. They asked me if I would do that. And I was so happy to do that because I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew what I had to see. I spent most of my life hunting and fishing in my younger years, so I was good at it. When our choppers landed that day, there was a cameraman and a chaplain with us, and I had to get in a different chopper. And as soon as the choppers left, I looked back behind me at the last chopper, and I saw Morgan, and his stance told me something. And they all started going around the leg of the jungle, and I had to go up and get my squad. And they were just standing there waiting for me, so I came around at the end. And when I looked across, as I came around, there was this flurry of automatic weapons fire, and Morgan and Black dropped like damp washcloths. Everyone instinctively hit the dirt, but the minute the round stopped, I jumped up and I charged. I did this 3 times before I knew I couldn't do it anymore. 4th time, I dove over the dike to my left, and eventually my squad sergeant and I ended up into the jungle where the enemy was. I crawled into this little mud hole, and when I looked over, I saw Viet Cong. We looked at each other for a split second before I shot. My squad sergeant said something, and I ducked, and I was holding my rifle above the mud hole I was in. I didn't want to bring down with me. And I rolled to one side to pull out a hand grenade from my leg pocket. And as I was getting to let go of my rifle, I felt this other ball roll into my hand. I never did see it. I was going to push it away. And that was the last time, I guess, I saw the light of day. But I'm extremely fortunate in that what I wanted to do was become a sculptor. And a month later in Japan, I discovered that I could still do that with no eyes and one good hand. I had a loving family at home. And as time progressed, once I got home, I started working, and now I am that sculptor that I always wanted to be. I'm fortunate. I'm doing what I want to do. And I don't really ever want to see again because I am one happy veteran.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your sharing that and for your story. And I'm really struck listening to you and thinking about John's book about how you brought our attention to, I was thinking about the word education, the moment of transition from a recruit into something else. And I'll never forget your story about the man drinking his own tea and how that was a turning point for you. And I'm really grateful for you sharing the rest of your story about what you've done with your life after coming back. And I know people will want to learn more, but thank you so much for being the first. I want to get to some of these other folks, but I really appreciate you being the first tonight. And I hope you'll speak again. Josh, you're right next to Michael. Josh Mance, if you don't mind going next, I'd appreciate it.
Hey, sure. Excuse me. I'd love to, Brian. Wow. Thanks to all the actors and for bringing John's story to life. And John, there's nothing like hearing you recite your own poetry. And it's good to see you again. My name's Josh Mons. I'm a former infantry officer and met John about 10 years ago when we did some great work with veterans back then. John has had a tremendous impact on my life and my healing process as well. And I'll just point out two things that really stuck out to me during this. One of which was John kind of accepting death while he was in the middle of combat. Something we hear quite a bit. He said, all the hope of having a future falls away in combat, so I discarded it. And there's a lot of talk today, and this is really important, good stuff about mindfulness and living in the present moment and not getting too stuck on the future or the past. And, I'll tell you what, I think John Musgrave knows how to live in the present moment. And when soldiers in this case are in the middle of these horrendous experiences, it kind of forces this kind of degree of surrender. But the possible disadvantage of that is when we lose hope of a future altogether. When we let go of our future, we let go of hope. And I think that's partially what John is really reminding us of today, is that, when his child came into his life, suddenly there was hope again. So I think it's important to keep a perspective on that. And the second quote that I really loved was when John wrote, "We weren't dealing with reality, reality was dealing with us." And again, whether it's extreme adversity or whether it's combat or whether it's, those final moments when we're approaching death, there is a degree of surrender and truth involved when the intensity of an experience is so high. And, sometimes we think we got life nailed until another actual experience comes along that takes it to another level. So those are just some things that really stuck out to me and reminded me of John. I just commend you again for the last 50 years of everyone that you've helped and the story that you've continued to tell. So thank you so much for letting me be part of this.
Thank you so much. Sorry, John. Thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate you being with us and taking our attention to those two moments of surrender as two different kinds of surrender. And I really appreciate what you said about how the modern world has all these, all kinds of advice about trying to be present. But what happens when you lose sight of the future or can't see a future anymore? And how do you reclaim it and reclaim the agency that you lost when you lost a sense of it? I so appreciate you bringing our attention to those two things. Thank you so much. Andy, you're next to Josh, if you don't mind unmuting yourself and going next. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Andy Marshall. I am the National Commander of the DAV for this past year. I am a combat wounded infantryman from Vietnam. I served with the Maricao Division of the 173rd Airborne, received a Purple Heart while serving with each unit. And, a lot of similarities between basic training, AIT training, except I remember the only thing we didn't have that Mr. Musgrave said was the DIs getting up on the tables and kicking our food away. But the one thing that stuck in my mind at the end of AIT training was the sergeant asking us, "Do you know what your job is?" And we gave him various answers. And he said, "No, your job is to make the enemy die for their country." And we took that pretty serious. Finally made sense. And, I served in Vietnam, and after my first Purple Heart was friendly fire, the second one, I didn't know how bad I was injured until we left Vietnam and flew to Camp Zama, Japan. And they told us everybody will be carried onto a bus except the two most seriously wounded soldiers on the plane. I said, man, I feel sorry for those two bastards. And then when I realized I was one of them, they even felt sorrier. I went to Camp Zama, Japan, and then briefly to a stop in Alaska. And I remember being in the litter by the door, and on the Air Force Guys working on the runway came in and said, stuck his head in and said, "Hey, soldier, are you cold?" I remember the doctor saying he's on so much morphine, he doesn't feel cold right now. They went to Walter Reed, spent 15 months. And, the thing that you said, Mr. Musgrave, I said the same thing, is the birth of my daughter gave me a purpose after coming home from Vietnam, not being able to find a job, the way you were treated. What am I going to do for me? But the birth of my daughter gave me that purpose, and it changed my life, as did the first job I had returning from Vietnam after no one would hire me, couldn't pass a physical, was working for disabled American veterans for 41 years. While in Vietnam, we used to talk about the 90 days in the jungle, three days back to the base camp. And back at base camp, you see foot and a half long rats running through the compound. We used to joke that, uh-oh, it's gone. Here came a mosquito and picked it up and took it off. That's how big the mosquitoes were over there. Leeches, same thing. You have leeches all over your body. Sometimes places you didn't want to have leeches. If you think that bug juice burns when you remove them from your arms and legs, try some other sensitive parts of your body. See how that burns. And we change socks about every 2 days, take off the really, really soaked ones and put on the wet ones. And then every 3 days, put on some more wet ones. They seem to never dry, even though the temperature is over 100 degrees. They seem to never dry. But, combat is combat. You don't want anybody to go through it. You want to survive. And then after that, you want to make sure that you survive by trying to never forget what happened to you. Never forget some of the things that happened over there, some of the circumstances you were in. But you don't want to think about them every day. You want to get away the best you can. And you don't want to become one of those 21 a day who are taking their own life. It's difficult out there if you don't have a good support system. It's like somebody asked me, would you like a service dog? I says, no. I got a wife that does that for me now. I don't need a companion animal to rely on. That's what my wife's for. But thank you, Mr. Musgrave, for your book. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for reading the book, parts of the book for the audience. And I hope it opens some eyes.
Thank you, brother. Welcome home.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate everything you brought and your 41 years of experience. Thank you for being third in line. And I'm grateful to everything you brought into the conversation. Naomi, you're right above Andy in my squares. You don't mind going next?
Sure. I'm Naomi Mathis. I am a Air Force veteran, served from 2000 to 2007 before I was medically retired. I was in Iraq in 2003. And I, unlike many of you, I have the silent injury. I was medically retired due to PTSD. And it's interesting because as you were going through everything that was said, even though you were in Vietnam, in 1967, in Iraq in 2003, the experience felt the same. The emotions that you evoked through your words, it felt the same. I will say, though, I did not know that you guys were free balling in Vietnam. I'll just say that. So that was interesting. But the justification that you gave for killing, you almost came to it's okay because I need to do this, and it's okay because I'm serving for my country. I'm a good Marine, and me being in the Air Force, you being a Marine, it was amazing to me that the emotion was the same. Combat, as Andy said, is combat. It does not matter what era or where you are or what wound you get or you experience. Also, I want to tell you, welcome home as well. And, it's because of your service that now I'm a national service officer, also with the DAV, and assisting veterans with their benefits. But it's because of you and your sacrifice and that we were able to now experience the parades and the welcome homes and get the benefits that we also have earned through our military service. So I just want to say thank you for continue to running point. Because I believe that Vietnam veterans do continue to run point on many other issues for the rest of us veterans. So I want to say thank you. Great book, and I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you, John. Thank you, Naomi. Ashleigh, do you mind going next?
Sure, absolutely will. Just, and you briefly introduced me. I'm a Marine Corps veteran of Afghanistan. I served in Afghanistan in 2009, right during the surge. John, I just wanted to say it's an absolute honor to share a virtual space with you. I guess I'm cheating a little bit. I did read the entire book, and I was floored in probably the most impactful way was just that it felt like sitting in a room across from you and listening to this conversation. It did not feel like, trying to read prose. It felt like just an honest to God conversation with a fellow Marine. And that it, in many ways, in many instances, had me laughing out loud. It brought me to tears at points. There were so many moments, just the lunacy, the sheer lunacy of boot camp and those stupid boot mistakes that you make throughout your younger career. And, I'm really glad to see that drill instructor humor has not changed over the decade. I'm pretty sure I was called a green at some point, the stings say the same. But I think one of the things that really hit me too was in the excerpt we talk about feeling like a terrified child. I look back being a parent now and looking at the things that I experienced and the things that I did at the tender age of 25, 26, and feeling like I was so grown up and invincible and bulletproof, but knowing now how vulnerable I probably really was, and just how that shaped all of my actions, and looking back on it, it is this alternate reality for me. But looking at how your instincts really kick in. I mean, that's the entire point. Your instincts drive you. Your instincts take care of you. That's what the Marine Corps does. It builds you into a point where you don't necessarily have to think, you just do. But it was great how Michael pointed out too, those sights and those sounds and those smells that will never leave you. It impacts how you come home. It impacts your ability to transition back into the real world. It impedes you in many, many ways. But as Naomi pointed out as well, and just looking at that last excerpt that David read, the work that you and Andy and Michael have done has completely changed the landscape of what it means to come home for people like me and Naomi and Josh and Greg. It is a completely different world. And I just have such an utter sense of gratitude and humility for what you have done to change the world for us. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. It truly means the world to us.
Thank you. And Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
Thank you so much, Ashleigh. Thank you. last but not least of our panelists, before hearing from John, Greg, I wondered if you wanted to say a couple words in response to what you heard tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, and Mr. Musgrave. Just amazing. Just to pull us all together and do this, Brian. It's a continual, it's a journey, and I continue to get so much out of it, and it's an honor to be a part of it. So let me say a couple things. First, I would say, sir, timeless. From why you joined the military, this sort of, nobleness or whatever that we have, this Boy Scout, that we're going to go do something, we're going to prove ourselves, and the ultimate kind of situation, to realizing that you're taking a human being's life to another day at the office. I mean, this is timeless, sir. It is timeless. And like everyone said, war is war. The era, the bullets, the technology can change, but what the service member has to go through and endure has remained consistent, I think, throughout time. I would just like to say this. I think that John, in his poem, he offers us the answer, and the answer is about peace. And peace, I think, can come in a lot of ways. For me, it's through my faith. It's through accepting. I cannot change anything that has happened, and so I don't choose to apply energy to that. That peace allows it unencumbers you. You can now move forward. You can now be where you are when you release that. I'll say this. So I was the old man amongst us that wounded here. I mean, I was almost 42 years old. And so I had a couple of wars behind me. But it struck me, it wasn't my kids being born, because they were 13 and 14 when I was wounded. But in the last 18 months, it was, I now have 4 grandkids, and it was the birth of those kids that has given me so much to fight for, so much to want to continue to serve and give, because I realize that there's so many of us that just didn't have that opportunity. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Thanks, buddy.
So thank you all. Before we go out to the audience, John, I know it was probably a surreal experience hearing these readers and actors read selections that I didn't tell you which selections we were going to do. And I presumed you took it anew. And I wondered if there was anything in the experience of listening to your own words read tonight that touched you or spoke to you in a direct way that you might like to respond to.
Sorry, were you talking to me, Brian?
I was, yeah. I was
I'm
just saying, was there something in tonight's performance that spoke to you, that touched you in some direct way?
Well, definitely. First, the honor that all of you would do this. I've always thought I was the luckiest man in the world, and I'm just more convinced than that today than ever. Listening to the words delivered by you guys was just inspirational, and it reminded me of how lucky I was to know Brian, and because those words wouldn't have got out there without him, and Marjolaine, and just everyone that's helped in this. I know I wrote a lot about fear, but fear was the constant state I was in. And it just reminded me as you were reading that, how desperately I wanted to be 19. And when my 19th birthday came in the bush, how greedy I got when I wanted to be 20. War is a filthy business. And it's especially so when you have children and you're fighting for you. But for all of that, I've got to say that people may think that Vietnam was the worst experience of my life. Well, it wasn't. Because of the guys I served with, it was one of the best experiences of my life. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to know them and to be schooled by them, by their example of the way they live their lives, and to be loved by them as much as I loved them. It's made me a much better man. I can't imagine who I would be had I not have known the young Marines that I served with and who I think of every day. But you folks have done a wonderful job of putting life into my words, and thank you so much.
Thank you, John, for the gift of your story. Before we go out to the audience, maybe Marjolaine, you can bring a few people up. I want to thank these panelists, and then I see Andy, you have your hand up. So while Marjolaine's bringing some folks up, if you wanted to jump in, go right ahead. Oh, Andy, you're still muted. I'm sorry. You are. Oh, there you are.
One of the things that really bothered me a lot when I was over there serving in Vietnam was that I could fight for my country, but could not vote at that time.
Buy a beer.
Yep. Could not vote under 21 years of age back then. Here we are over there fighting for our country, and we couldn't vote for the people to lead our country.
Exactly right.
Thank you so much. So if we were in a live setting, you would have a uproarious applause thanking you for your contributions. You just have me saying thank you so much to all of you. We want to, in the fleeting time we have left, about 15, 20 minutes, I see, Michael, you have your hand up. We want to bring a few people up from the audience, and I'll just restate the question quickly, and then I know Marjolaine's going to bring a few more people. I see one already coming up now, which is, in spite of the fact this story started more than 50 years ago and clearly resonates across generations, what spoke to you tonight? What resonated with you? What touched you? What was true? Michael, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go down to Jet. Michael.
One thing I remember and hearing it many times was, we did not belong there.
We did not belong there. Which is something you came to understand.
Yes. Yes, that's for sure.
For a period of time. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Jet, you are our first audience member. I really appreciate you kicking it off. If you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself, what resonated with you? What spoke to you tonight? What was
Thank
true?
you. This book was very touching, and I would like to just thank John for this. It was very emotional for me, even though I've never experienced the experiences that you all have faced, war and being a veteran and violence and stuff. In your reflection, you spoke about the soldier who was attacking you, who shot you, maybe your friends, and you spoke about how that if you could be with him now, you said you would want to wish him peace. Was that empathy? Was that forgiveness? And how has empathy or forgiveness shaped your healing process? Is what my rep. And if it was like a sort of understanding between you, you said that you wondered if he was scared as well, because you were scared. I was just wondering, like, how has empathy, and if that was forgiveness, or do you think that those moments of pain and fear, do those moments just stay static, or do you have like a better understanding of those moments now that you've had years to reflect on them?
Thank you so much, Jet. John, do you want to take on Jet's really poignant question?
When I wrote the poem "Notes to the Man Who Shot Me," it was an acknowledgement that I was having to make, that I wanted to sign a peace treaty. I carried hatred for the North Vietnamese around like a sacred child ever since I'd come home, and I carried it because I felt I owed it to my buddies. And it was a horrible weight that did nothing but hold me back. And many, 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 many years down the road, I reached the point to where I made enough peace inside my mind that I could make this announcement by writing this poem. But I knew that that was only part of it, because your vote gets your gut gets a vote. And if I could intellectualize away the hatred, but if I could not rid myself of the hatred emotionally, it would continue to prey on me. And that mistaking loyalty to my dead buddies by feeding that hatred was so wrong. They wouldn't want me to do that. They wouldn't want me to go through that. And so I went back to Vietnam and hope to make my total peace there. Ken Byrnes and Lynn Novick had arranged for some North Vietnamese soldiers who had fought our unit, fought me, to meet and give me the opportunity to declare peace. And unfortunately, the government of Vietnam was angry about the documentary when I got there. And so they ordered those particular veterans not to speak to me specifically. And now veterans are allowed to meet together in Vietnam all the time and do great work together.
And you were excited.
And those North Vietnamese soldiers were excited and disappointed, communicated with me later that how disappointed they were that we couldn't get together. So I've declared my peace, and now it doesn't make the nightmares go away, but it makes the days go by much, much easier.
Thank you so much, John. And thank you, Jet, for your question. This is an instance where if you really want to go deeper into this particular part of John's story, the epilogue of his book describes all of this in a lot of detail. And one of the things I'm most touched by in John's epilogue is how he leaves things unresolved with the wish for there to be resolution. And I feel like that's as truthful as any other part of the book where he bears witness to the experiences he's had and the things he's done. Buck, you've been waiting patiently. We have time for just a few of you to respond tonight, but over to you, Buck
Yeah, hey, John, nice to meet you again. I don't know if you remember me. We met many years ago at a Marine Corps ball in Ottawa, Kansas. I grew up in, my grandma's Sherry Wright. So I currently reside in Baldwin. So we're not too far away. I recently got done reading your book. I really appreciate it. What really resonated with me was I read it right at the time of the withdrawal of Afghanistan. I'm an Afghanistan vet. That turmoil you had coming back, while you're going to Baker and stuff like that. Obviously, my kids go to, around Baldwin area, so I'm getting to drive those areas and stuff like that. And getting to kind of relate to that really helped me out. One thing that kind of struck home was how we kind of dehumanize, our enemy and stuff like that. Just remember that, doing that at the Taliban and stuff like that, and how you're really desensitized even afterwards on some of the events you see and stuff like that. So really appreciate it, John. Hopefully we'll meet up around town sometime. But yeah, thanks for the book. It really helped me in that kind of turmoil of going through that withdrawal and how it was not exactly the way it should have been. So
yeah, thanks. And tell your grandma hi for me.
I will.
Thank you so much, Buck. I appreciate that. And, had we more time, the way we first met, John was at Fort Riley, Kansas. He was working with Josh Montz and a wonderful veteran, at the time, active duty serviceman, at the time, Major Jeff Hall. I know he went on to other ranks, and we saw John respond to our work performing Greek tragedies about war and hold the attention of 800 soldiers in uniform in this way that I'd never seen before with his generation. That there was they were leaning forward and there was this reciprocity happening in the room. And I just appreciate, Buck, you bringing into the room the withdrawal from Afghanistan, because I know it's something John wants to talk about and also something that resonates with many parts of his book. And I know I'm not speaking to him, but the hope was that veterans of your generation would find reciprocity and connection in the way he told his story. So I appreciate you bearing witness to that and bringing that into the room. Brigadier General, retired, Laurie Sutton. It's so great to see you. You are next. It's wonderful to have you with us.
Oh, Brian, I got to tell you, listening to the stories and seeing old friends, David Strathairn, Greg Gadson, you, Marjolaine, and the whole gang here. And, John, I remember years ago watching Ken Byrnes series and listening to your stories and just thinking, gosh, I'd love to read about your service, and now I get the chance to, and I'm ordering your book tonight. I just wanted to just very briefly say thank you so much to each of you. Ashleigh, your work with the DAV, the first benefits counselor who got my courage to apply for the benefits that I had earned with Sammy Mantilla here in New York City, a DAV giant and pioneer. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And Naomi, gosh, great to hear new voices, new friends, folks I haven't met yet. And I would just say, I want to just pick up on one point that was mentioned a little bit ago. Brian, you had mentioned the importance of thinking that, not every issue has to be resolved. Not every performance is perfect. And in fact, as humans, that's the whole point. We're out there, we're real, we're authentic, we make mistakes, and then we fix them up and we got backup. And I just want to say that that's a tradition that's as long as our country. Our founding pioneers, they knew they couldn't resolve every little piece of what would make our country and our Constitution endure. And so they knew that this would be a great experiment whose outcome depends upon the service, the sacrifice, the work of citizens and soldiers and sailors and Marines, yes, and Air Force and Coasties and just all of us working together. And that work continues. And I would say that for as much work, Brian, as you and Marjolaine and the whole team have done getting us to this point, our most important work still lies ahead. So meet me on that high ground. I'll see you there. I'll be the one with the big grin. Cool.
Thank you so much, Laurie. It's great to see you and so great to have you back. When we first met Laurie Sutton near the Pentagon in a room with colonels and other folks, she was saying something I know John and I had talked about over the years as well, which is, she said, can you do your work in football stadiums for 30,000 soldiers at a time? And I said, well, that's not the scale of theater, although it turns out on Zoom it can be. We've learned later. And she said, well, that's the scale of our problem, the scale of the need. And I get the sense that, I hear what you're saying about service, that we're all just scratching the surface of the need by the work that we're trying to do. And it's so inspiring to have you back in the room with us, Lori. I really appreciate it. Charles, you are next. Thank you for your patience. Really appreciate it. Over to you.
Okay. Well, I entered into the Army just a little bit after John, later in 1967. And something he was talking about transition, to being in a receiving barracks and what was going on with that. And what I remember is I was in a receiving barracks for like 3 or 4 days, and there was about 12 of us guys, and we kind of got to know each other. We're all in our civilian clothes. Of course, we're in the same clothes every day because we didn't have a change of clothes. And then we got our head shaved and we got uniforms. And I'm talking to these people that I've met and I kind of know over the past 3 or 4 days. And when I'm talking to them, I can't connect to who they are. So I have to imagine them like wearing a plaid shirt and having longer hair, the way they used to look like, 2 hours ago. So I had to kind of, and then the other thing is, you get further along in your service and you're meeting people and you're chatting with them and so on. And the people who finished high school and went into the military would talk about being in high school. And the guys who had been out of high school for 2 or 3 years would talk about what they did after they got out of high school. Wouldn't say anything about high school at all. And John also mentioned, he went off to war, as it were, and, the support of the country, and that's the patriotic thing. And then his surprise, didn't expect to see this anti-war reaction. Well, I signed in as a medic because I was opposed to the war. I wanted to be a non-combatant. I kept track of some of the underground material, newspapers and other stuff while I was in Vietnam. And when I returned, I was very well aware that there was an anti-war movement. I hunted up a girl I knew in high school. She was in college. And I said hi, and I was out of the Army. I was back from Vietnam. And she looked at me and she said, how many babies did you kill? And I said, well, let's talk about it. And we had a conversation. And I respected her for her concern, her being candid, being willing to talk to me and to deal with the issues. And, I saw it as, I wasn't personally offended. It was like, okay, this is America. This is what's going on. This is what's happened in this culture now. And I was okay with it. So that's about it. I could go on and on, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Charles. I really appreciate you sharing that. And I wonder, John, if you want to respond to what Charles just said.
Well, I'm glad that you had someone that would talk to you about it. And because usually when I heard that accusation, it was shouted from cars or other moving vehicles, or shouted from across the streets. And of course, I didn't kill any babies and I didn't know anybody that did. But I was amazed that we were all being painted with a very broad brush. And at first, I transferred my hatred of the NBA to the peace movement. And it was just it was a tough time to be a teenager, I'll tell you. It was hard to find a place to release the anger and the fear and the hatred. So they bounced around through your life, screwing it up, because you couldn't figure out what else to do with it. And you had a better handle on it than I did, brother. That's for sure. And God bless you for being a medic. Nobody's braver on the field than the medics and the corpsmen. Nobody.
Thank you so much, John. Again, once again, we're scratching the surface. So if your interest is piqued, I'm the one selling the book. I recommend getting one or hearing John narrate it himself on Audible or on other platforms, because he does a beautiful job of reading his own words as well. There's a whole third of the book dedicated to the complexity of returning and engaging with civilians in the way that Charles described. And well, John's work speaks for itself and his words speak for themselves, but it's a really powerful part of the story we weren't able to get to tonight. So I appreciate you, Charles, bringing some of that into the room and drawing John out a little bit. We're relatively limited in time. I wondered, Josh Montz, you've had a long history with John, but if you wanted to respond to anything that's been said so far, I wanted to give you another chance to jump in as well.
Oh, Brian, I'm just taking in all these conversations and just all the powerful things that have been said tonight. All I might offer up or just reflect on for a moment is just the capacity that each of us has to tell our story, whether it's in an audience like this with thousands of people or whether it's one-on-one with somebody over lunch. Our capacity to tell our story with a purpose and to create meaning out of it is the very thing that can lead to hope for our futures and to maybe leading a better life, and certainly to be able to pass that on to others. And I think that's central to the heart of theater of war is how do we create resonance with other human beings through narratives and through this art of articulation. So again, just very honored to be part of this and keep going.
Thanks, Josh. I really appreciate it. The thing I was really touched by listening to everyone speak tonight, all the veterans especially who've spoken, is the many ways I heard hope come back into the conversation. Many ways I heard those who've experienced what are called disabilities or injuries that are certainly challenges to living functional, easy lives, the ways those injuries ended up becoming part of their sense of purpose and identity in really powerful ways. And so I'm grateful to the Vietnam generation for modeling that and talking about it. I don't think theater of war and our work now would be happening if there weren't this generation of Vietnam veterans like John and Andy and Michael and others who've spoken, Charles, who demanded that there be a conversation about the very things we're talking about right now and weren't necessarily met with welcoming and open arms when they made that demand. And we go to other countries with our work, and sometimes it's like going back into time because no one wants to talk about it. In many other nations, when we go to the UK, they certainly don't want to talk about it. And there's a sort of pervasive feeling that if you talk about it too much, you create a culture of victims. And that to me is just another strategy of victim blaming, of another strategy of hazing and cruelty, of silencing the voices of those who've experienced trauma and loss and heartbreak and all the things we've talked about and heard about tonight. So the fact that we're talking about it now, I think it's not a small thing to say, is born on the backs of the Vietnam generation. But I also think the fact that we're talking about it right now, and the reason we wanted to do this event, and I know that John's connected with it too, is because of this current cohort that's come back from the recent wars, the millennials, and even younger servicemen and women and people who also are demanding that we have a conversation about mental health and trauma and suicide and loss and post-traumatic growth and connection and love and all the things that we talk about in these conversations here tonight. And I second Josh's statement that I hope that this conversation that we by no means finished, but just started by way of John's book. Well, I hope it leads you to want to read John's book and explore his work and maybe go deeper into what he's put out, because it's really powerful. But there are so many other stories represented on this screen. I hope it makes you want to see Michael's sculptures. I hope it will make you want to see Greg Gadson's films. I hope it makes you want to see Laurie Sutton's public speaking. The list goes on and on. Josh's book. It's the chorus of these stories and expressions of truth that ends up, I think, overwhelming the public that doesn't want to hear them. And that's why I started tonight by saying that I wasn't going to warn the public who was watching that there was violence or graphic language in this presentation, because what John has written is the truth. And I've been grateful just to be here to witness it. So we're now at 9:06, and I'm always mindful that we try to end relatively on time, but I wonder if there's something that hasn't been addressed by one of my questions or one of the things that have been brought up that maybe one of you who are still with us on the screen has something to say. It could also be John, no pressure, but I defer to you as an audience. Maybe someone would like to have one last word or has something burning within them to say. Yes, Laurie, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brian. I just want to take a moment to recognize the service, the sacrifice of the Vietnam veterans. John, you and all of your brothers and sisters, truly, you have helped us as a nation to mature and make sure that the new generation of veterans, the Joshes, the Ashleighs, the Naomis, receive the welcome home that you never got. And I just would like to just close, Brian, with reminding ourselves of the Vietnam veterans of America and their really motto, words to live by. Never again will one generation of veterans turn its back on the next. Not now, not ever, never again. Back to you, Brian.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I really appreciate that. You're always good for a last word and bringing it home. But John, since this is your event and you have honored us with so many words, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to say to this audience tuning in that you haven't said.
Yes, God bless the people of Ukraine and pray for peace.
Thank you so much, John. You won't be surprised to learn that Theater of War Productions is developing a project with the people of Ukraine, which we'll be announcing very soon. So you all will be invited to be part of that, where we'll hear the voices of people in Ukraine and all over the world responding to and bearing witness to the truth of their experiences. You all are a chorus as well in that conversation, so we want you to come. If you were touched by anything that was said in this conversation that we by no means have finished tonight, know that Theater of War Productions' benediction is simply this: you're not alone in this room, virtual but connected. You're not alone across the country and the world. If you were touched by anything that was said, we have probably last event, we had 42 countries tuning in, so more than we represented on the squares here. Most critically, as John has made so evident in the actors and also the intergenerational conversation that's begun in this dialogue that we started tonight, you're not alone across time. The one thing, and Josh has written about this, others, Laurie talks about this in her work, John as well, that we've seen in touring our work all over the world is that the experience of trauma can be deeply isolating. It can make you feel like you're the only person on the planet who's ever felt this much pain, this much shame, this much guilt, this alone. And the power of story, the power of narrative, the power of what John's given us, but so many others on the screen as well, is a lifeline to say, no, in fact, if you related to my story, then you are not alone. And those are words you can say, but until you receive them, I think they're not necessarily meaningful. So we hope that many of you out there tonight, no matter what your background or experience, that you receive that message and that it drives you to want to have more conversations like this one intergenerationally about really critical issues. And most critically, that it makes you want to read John Musgrave's book. With the link again is in the chat, The Education of Corporal John Musgrave. If you're interested in seeing more of our events, congratulations, you've been added to our mailing list. You're going to have to unsubscribe. Our next event is April 21st, next Thursday, a week from tomorrow. We're presenting the Nurse Antigone, which is our project about the moral suffering of frontline nurses and nurses throughout the nation. There are 4 million of them who have been overexposed, under-resourced, and in need of our support, especially over the last 2 years. This will be a partnership with the Greater New York City Black Nurses Association chapter. So we'll be focusing on the experiences of Black nurses over the last 2 years. And you are all welcome to be part of that conversation as well. We're dropping the link into the chat. All our work is free. We hope you'll come see the Nurse Antigone with the Greater New York City Black Nurses Association. And with that, if you'd like to know more, I suggest you follow us at Theater of War, spelled the American way, ER of War, where you also can find posts that will lead you back to John Musgrave's incredible work. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ashleigh, Greg, obviously Oscar and David. Thank you, Josh, Michael, Naomi. Thank you, Andy. And thank you all and Ashleigh, of course. Thank you all so much for what you brought tonight. It exceeded all of my expectations. I hope John's as well. We end with immense gratitude, but also his message of peace, which I feel like those who've served in war are the most credible messengers of peace. Because they know what war is. So thank you for bearing witness to the truth of your experiences and for that message of peace. We hope to see you at our next event. And most of all, thank you so much to DAV for partnering with us. We hope we'll have many more partnerships to come. Thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful night. Be safe, be well, and I'll see you at the next event. Okay, take care.
Hello, Ashleigh. See you Saturday, Naomi.
Good night.
Good night.